This is my story, and although this happened back in December of 2019, I still think about it on a daily basis because it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I hope it offers some sort of enlightenment on what to do and what not to do if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. Back in early December, I had ventured out to do a bit of late-night shopping. I'm a 31-year-old stay-at-home mom, and I have two young children. So once my husband gets home from work, I like to take some time to myself and go shopping. Take a drive or run errands, kid-free. It was around 8:30 in the afternoon when I arrived at the Target I frequent. I'm by no means a paranoid or anxious individual, but during college I had attended several seminars on human trafficking and have done plenty of research on my own learning to identify red flags and what precautions to take when out in public alone, especially at night. I carry several self-defense items on my person at all times: Kubotan, alarm, and universal handcuff key just in case. I parked directly in front of the store, next to a cart caddy, and took a mental note of the vehicles parked nearby again, just as precautions. I was taught at an early age to always be observant of your surroundings, and being a control freak just naturally makes you that way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary that night, and the parking lot was actually quite empty, most likely because it was a weekday. As I entered the store, I began browsing like usual, following the natural flow of the store departments, following the main aisle around. I had been browsing for only 10 to 15 minutes when I noticed a young gentleman of perhaps 20 years. He was tall, skinny, dressed in a dirty gray two-piece sweatsuit and brown work boots. He looked over at me. I smiled and said hello, but his facial expression was blank. He looked like he may have been high on something by the look in his eyes, but he didn't seem to care for my gesture and he quickly moved on. At first glance, there was nothing in particular that alarmed me about him, except I took notice of the fact he was just wandering down the main aisle with no cart or basket, hands in his pockets, and didn't seem to be with anyone. I continued shopping with no second thoughts, and made my way to the next department. Several minutes had passed, and that's when I noticed a second young gentleman wearing the same gray sweatsuit and similar pair of work boots. Again, no cart, no basket. He glanced at me, then quickly darted his eyes away when he realized I was looking directly at him. I became a bit more alerted, but still remained composed and continued on browsing. Another 15 minutes or so passed, and that's when a third older man caught my attention, and you guessed it, the same gray sweatsuit and work boots with no cart, no basket, just his hands in his pockets. I assumed they were in some sort of work uniform, maybe construction workers. But why weren't they walking around together? And why didn't they have any items to purchase? At this point, it was difficult to focus on browsing. I had a bad feeling about these three men, and it became clear that something was a bit off. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I felt as if I was being monitored by the three of them, as if they were all communicating my whereabouts, as I continued to make my way through the store because in each department I entered. It didn't take long for me to notice one of the three men pass by. Whatever side aisle I happened to be in, making their presence known to me. I stayed completely vigilant while trying not to panic or allow my suspicions to overwhelm me. Something about their presence felt very heavy and dark, so I decided to test their intentions, to prove I wasn't overthinking the situation and my bad gut feeling was valid. I began picking random aisles and traveling back and forth between departments in a very unorganized and random fashion to see if the men would continue to pass by me as frequently as they had been. With every aisle I popped into, it was just a few minutes later one of them would make an appearance, staring me down as they passed by. It felt as if I was being surrounded like a wild animal, hunted even. They were no longer trying to be inconspicuous, which was the scariest part of it all. And everything instinctual was screaming at me to get out of there. I gripped my cart so tightly and figured if I got too close, I could use the cart to push them away, or at least create distance between us. By this point, I had been shopping for about an hour altogether and was ready to purchase my items, but honestly, I felt too uncomfortable to continue browsing even if I wanted to. The men had been following me all that time, and I was becoming more annoyed, if anything. The store was pretty empty around this time, one of the main reasons I like shopping at night, but that made this particular situation even more unsettling. Two preteen girls were wandering around by themselves, which quickly caught my attention because the men had bypassed them, making similar advances. But the girls were seemingly oblivious, so I quietly got their attention and asked them to go find their parents and stay with them, trying to warn them, without freaking them out. The mother in me was in full-on protection mode. I couldn't imagine having my young children with me on this night. Thank God they were home safe and sound. As I made my way to the checkout, I noticed one of the men coming up from behind me, walking at a quicker pace this time, so I immediately stopped and turned to lock eyes with him as he approached. I will never forget the darkness in his eyes. An eerie smirk formed on his face as he nudged my shoulder, continuing to stare me down, walking backwards to hold his sinister gaze as he exited out the store. I had lost sight of the other two men, and I hated the uncertainty of it all. He made his message clear at that very moment. My stomach dropped and my entire body began to shake. It was a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a kid getting lost in the supermarket, a feeling of desperation. I quickly walked to the checkout, discreetly asked the cashier if I could speak to a manager, and told them what had transpired over the last hour, politely asking for a male employee to walk me to my car and for them to alert their security team member. When I told the manager what happened, her face sank as if she had already known about these men, and once I described them, she confirmed she knew who I was talking about. She expressed that several of the female employees had found the men unsettling in the past, and reassured me that someone would escort me to my car. She made a report about the incident and said she would alert the authorities. I was still shaking but felt relieved that she believed me and showed concern for the other young female patrons in the store. She took my information. Then a young male employee walked me out to my car. What I saw as I exited the store made me so sick to my stomach, solidifying all of my suspicions. A white, windowless van was parked in the lot directly behind my car, about a 3 parking space distance between us, and one of the men seated in the driver's seat, and the other two leaning against the side of the van facing my car, attempting to hide out of view. I mean, how cliché and obvious can you be? Your license plate might as well read Lady Snatchers at that point. Whatever their intent, it didn't seem pure. I pointed them out to the male employee and said, "There they are," which then prompted the men to scurry into the van and speed out of the parking lot without hesitation. I honestly don't want to think about what would have happened if I walked out to my car alone, and I'm so freaking grateful I made it home safe and sound and lived to tell my story. Over the following week, I had heard there were several abduction attempts in the shopping center parallel to that target, and I'm almost certain it was the same individuals. To the 3 matching sweatsuit creeps, let's not ever meet again. These events occurred in Dallas, a city which has become increasingly dangerous over the last few years. I am now aware of human trafficking in this city. I had a coworker pulled out of work and put in a safe house by the FBI because she finally decided to rat her family out. However, I never thought they randomly snatched people. In all the stories, they used drugs or coercion. So 2 summers ago, I was cycling to a smoke shop. It's kind of out of my way in a not great neighborhood, but I'm fairly confident. It's daylight. I ride all over the city and I know the store. I was 24, short, and I had short pink hair, but I always considered myself too intimidating to kidnap. I forget that even if I am a veteran, I'm also a short, white girl. I pull up to a crosswalk, and I'm waiting for a light when 2 Hispanic guys start catcalling me from a windowless white van. No identification, no stickers. Even the way they yelled at me was weird. It wasn't the typical, nice tits, let me fuck you, locker room bullshit. They would talk to each other and then yell through a cracked window about how we are gonna get you. And your next puta. It felt off like they were excited, but I just flipped them both off and rode away. End of story, right? Over a mile later, I'm right around the block from my destination. To set it up, there was a massive empty lot, really more like 2 lots, on my right. That was the side I was riding down. To my left, there was a back fence of a very, very old and probably abandoned house. It was like that all around, mostly drifters or old people in poverty and a few trap houses. The point is, there was no one else visible, and even if they had seen this, they wouldn't have said anything for their own safety. I'm pedaling along when the album ends, and I think, almost there. I'm not going to stop and fumble with my phone. This saved my life. As I'm thinking this, a white van pulls up on my left and stays right inside my peripheral. They revved the engine a few times and tried to spook me, but something told me not to move. Don't let them know you know. So I acted like my music was playing and pedaled a little faster. Up ahead of me was a brick wall to my left and a tall tree over it before a quick alley entrance. Suddenly they punch the gas and pull up in front of me, stopping next to the brick wall. They were trying to corner or funnel me, putting me in a position where I had to ride between their door and the wall. This all happened in a span of maybe 7 seconds. I honestly didn't feel panic. I didn't actively register any fear or sweat or anything. It was like someone much calmer took over my body and was like, nope, no fucking way. I remember instantly crossing the street without even thinking about the movements or why. As I pedaled up their other side, I realized this was the van from before, and now it has a window repair magnet on the side. It's too small to look good and has absolutely no contact info. Just a generic name. I kept rubbernecking and saw that there was no one in the front, but there was movement behind the seats. The guys were in the back by the door. They had planned to literally drag me off my bike, off the street, and do God knows what to me. Once I was past, they scrambled into the front seat and pulled out so hard they burnt rubber. I got to the store safe, but I still hate myself for not taking the plate number. Not that it would do any good, they probably switched them out later. I knew I had almost been kidnapped and killed, or worse. But it wasn't till I told the story to someone from Mexico that I found out it was traffickers. They said it sounded sadly familiar and happens all the time. I have no family, and my roommates are just roommates. I would have been gone for 3 to 7 days before anyone decided something was wrong. Even then, they would have just known I left on my bike and vanished. I would have been across the border or dead before anyone even knew I was gone. So, human traffickers, let's not meet. This sad, terrible story took place in the year 2003 when I was a 14-year-old girl still living in my home country of Uruguay. My best friend at the time, the same age as me, was my neighbor who lived with her mother and grandmother 3 houses down from mine. We had been friends since we were babies. We grew up together, went to the same school, moved in the same social circle, went on vacation together, shared clothes, CDs, food. We were basically sisters. Our families were close, etc. Her mom, who was in her early 30s at the time, was a single mom working as a secretary. They didn't have it bad. Between her salary and the grandmother's pension, they lived comfortably and without any major setbacks. Her mom started seeing a foreign guy who was in the country for business. He claimed to be from Spain, but he had a funny accent, as if he was originally from Italy or another non-Spanish speaking country. He was supposedly rich, despite staying in a rundown hotel. He would often show pictures of himself in a very luxurious residence. He said it was his house in Ibiza, pictures of him driving a red sports car, a picture of him in front of the Eiffel Tower, and so on. There were so many red flags, but we were really innocent back then. After a month and a half or so of dating, my friend's mom said they were leaving the country in the next 6 or 7 months. She was in love with him, and he had promised her a life of luxury in Spain, and everything was going to be perfect. She and her daughter would travel Europe together with him. The grandma couldn't come, at least not yet. She was supposed to meet them in the future after they had settled in. This is where I come in, since I was such good friends with Maritza. The guy had told Maritza's mom to bring me along for vacation, that it would be good for Maritza, make the transition easier, etc. I was, of course, thrilled. A month in Europe with my best friend who was moving away, and the idea of going to see her every summer and staying at her stepfather's mansion was like a dream. My parents, of course, weren't so thrilled at first, but as they got to know him, they liked him, and eventually he won them over too. Eventually, I even got a little weekend job as a waitress at my uncle's restaurant to help my parents with the plane ticket and other costs. We got my passport, we were ready to go. As the months went by, it became evident that I wasn't going to be able to go. The money I had saved wasn't enough. It didn't even cover half of the ticket, and my parents couldn't come up with the money for the rest of the trip. A week or so before they left, the guy came to my house and talked to my parents. He offered to pay for my plane ticket. My parents politely declined. I was fuming. I swore I would never talk to my parents again. I didn't come out of my room for days. Eventually, I got over it, and when it was time to go to the airport to say goodbye to them, I did. We cried. We hugged. We promised each other we would meet up next summer. By then, I would already have the money saved. They left. We never heard from them again. The days went by and nothing. I remember the grandmother, the pain on her face, the nights she went on without sleeping, home alone without her daughter and granddaughter who were supposed to call her as soon as they arrived in Spain, and yet they never did. Eventually they were reported as missing. Surprisingly enough, the guy had given out his real first name and last name the whole time, so after the cops got involved, turns out he had this huge record in Spain and Italy, and had been in jail for drugs, prostitution, kidnapping, extortion, and God knows what else. The police told their family that they were most likely sold into a human trafficking ring, that this was very common, and that sadly, there were too many cases like it. There was nothing to do but wait. Last time anyone saw them or had any register of them was at the airport in Seville when they arrived. It breaks my heart even to this day, and to think that if my parents had said yes, I wouldn't be here today sends chills down my spine. Sometimes I look Maritza up on Facebook in hopes that I'll find her. Maybe she gained her life and freedom back, but nothing ever shows up. The grandmother died in 2013, sadly without ever seeing or hearing about her daughter and granddaughter again.